What would you do if somebody you knew came down with coronavirus and was ordered by the government to be in quarantine for 21 days? Well, that's precisely the kind of legal question that my next guest, Judge Ravi Sandill, sees on a regular basis. Judge Sandill has been a district court judge in Harris County for over a decade and is widely considered to be one of the thought leaders in our profession. I know whenever Judge Sandill expresses his opinions on legal issues, I listen. Judge Sandill is also a military brat who has lived all over the place. His father was in the Air Force. He's a cancer survivor. And most importantly, he's a husband and father to a young boy. Judge Sandill and I talk about how the Harris County judges and judges in other jurisdictions are working to keep the wheels of justice rolling during the pandemic, why that's so important for our economy, and what he and other judges are doing to protect our legal rights during this unprecedented event. I had a great time talking to Judge Sandill. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. And now I give you Judge Ravi Sandill. Hey, everybody, I've got Judge Ravi Sandill here. Judge Sandill, as you heard in the introduction, is a Harris County District Judge, and this is a real honor for me as a lawyer because Judge Sandill has been one of the leading jurists, one of the leading figures down at the courthouse in Harris County in putting together the efforts to try to keep the wheels of justice rolling during these very, very strange times we have. So, Judge, first of all, thank you for coming on today. How are you doing?
I'm doing as well as can be. I want to thank you for having me. I've heard of Brian Beckcom for quite some time. I know you've had some cases in my court, but I think this is the first time we've actually sat down and talked.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because before we started this interview, of course, I would do a little bit of research. And, if you're a lawyer in Harris County and you don't know who Judge Sandill is, you're not paying that much attention. But I learned some interesting things about your background. So before we get into some of the things that you and the other judges are doing in Harris County, why don't you tell us, the listeners who aren't lawyers, who may not know who you are, a little bit about, who you are, where you come from, a little bit about your background.
Well, I'll give you the abbreviated version. I can give you the long version later. But both my parents are immigrants. They both immigrated from India to Canada separately. I was actually born in Toronto. And then my dad immigrated to the States. My family immigrated to the States, where my brother was born in Philadelphia. And at that point, when I was, I want to say 6 or 7 years old, my dad joined the U.S. military, the Army first, and he spent a tour at Fort Hood in Texas, and then decided he wanted to switch over to the Air Force. And so I was an Air Force brat from that point until I graduated from high school. I went to high school in England, spent 3.5 years at Lake Heath American High School there, and then went on to UT. Did UT in 4 years. While I was there, I was involved in federal government, worked a little bit with Representative Doggett, worked with Senator Kerry at the time, who later became Secretary Kerry, and then did White House advance the president and the first lady, Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, Senator Clinton. I was trying to figure out her title.
At the time.
And I did some work at the White House's Council of Economic Advisors as well while I was an undergrad, and then came to law school, continued doing my advanced work for President Clinton, and then after graduating, clerked for a year with Justice Cohen at the First Court of Appeals, and then went into private practice. And then that's when my life sort of went off script, and I was diagnosed with cancer about 3 months into my practice. Did a first-line treatment for about 8 months, relapsed, and had a stem cell transplant. And then, got back on the horse about 4 to 6 months later, continued my practice. And then in 2007, I was asked to run locally on the Democratic ticket for judicial spot. And, there hadn't been a Democrat elected in Harris County since 1994.
Yeah.
And so I'll tell you this. I went to my judge who was elected, the last time he was elected was as a Republican. And I asked him what he thought. He said, listen, Ravi, he goes, you know, they're asking you today, if for some reason the Democrats win and you're not on that ticket, they're not going to ask you again. And
Yeah.
I was like, I don't know if that's a compliment or what that is, Judge, but he goes, and so I decided to run and, was elected in 2008 in November and, became a judge at the age of 32. It was an interesting experience.
Yeah, I'll bet. So let's break that down just a little bit. So my father was in the Air Force too, and I moved around quite a bit growing up. I was born in Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana, and lived in upstate New York where my brother was born, and then lived on the Guam Islands for about 6 months because my dad was flying B-52s over Vietnam. And then lived in Kansas, and then Carswell Air Force Base, Fort Worth. So we moved around quite a bit. I chose A&M over Texas, although I did go to trade school in Austin. I tell people I went to trade school, but yeah. So tell us a little bit about, and then I have a history in my family of cancer too. My mother died when I was 10 of cancer, and actually that's how I ended up ultimately becoming a lawyer, because my dad, it was very, very bad malpractice by the United States government. My dad sued the United States government, which, as you know, is very, very difficult to do.
Yes.
Yeah. And so that kind of inspired me at a young age to become a lawyer. But tell us a little bit about, if you don't mind, how whether it's your military background or the experience with surviving cancer, or your experience in DC, or all that stuff. How has that impacted kind of your views of the legal system and kind of what you do as a judge?
Well, and Brian, you've been in my court. I mean, it's an interesting place, as you probably tell other folks. I mean, I don't fit any mold, right? I mean, I'm Indian. I was only South Asian everywhere I lived.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's interesting growing up that way in the military, because it's not like the military is not, it is not homogenous at all. I mean, it is a mixed race community.
Absolutely.
At the time that I served, when my dad served, there weren't any of me.
Yeah.
And so I always had to find a way to fit in. And that's sort of, that's helped me, I think, in one way, because I've had to be adaptable my entire life, but also at the same time, I've never felt like I had to fit in too.
Yeah.
And I can always give me a little bit of room to be me. The cancer, I think, I was diagnosed at the age of 26, and the good thing for me, and that what came out of cancer, was that by the time I was 26, I'd seen most of the world. I'd had a lot of experiences that most people never have in their entire lifetime. Yeah. So, I mean, as scary as it was, I had done a lot, and I was aware of that. I mean, I was blessed, and I've been blessed my entire life. And so the cancer diagnosis is scary, but dying I didn't have that sense of like, I didn't get to do this, I didn't get to do that, because I'd done so much.
Yeah.
But it makes you a little bit brazen, right? When you're 26 and you've sort of been told, there's a 50-50 chance you're going to survive pretty advanced cancer, you sort of live life to the fullest. And I sort of am always ready to come out the gate as fast as possible.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a little bit frustrating to others, but I think for me, I doing things that I feel are right, I'll do. I won't let perfection be the enemy of good.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll come out the box and I'll set up a system or a procedure, and it may need to be tweaked, but I think it's what it needs to be done to make things work.
Yeah. For
the betterment of the legal system. And so, I think, sometimes, I can rub people the wrong way, but I'm not doing it for me. I'm doing it because I think it's what needs to be done to make things more equitable.
Yeah.
And usually more economically efficient.
I remember growing up on some of these military bases, and you talk about the diversity there. There would be a Protestant religious service, a Catholic religious service, and a Jewish religious service, and that was it. And if you were Methodist or Baptist, or it was just all one service. But it would be so neat because, you know, I would get to go to these Protestant services, and there would be these Southern Baptist gospel choirs that I would have never gotten a chance to see had it not,
Yeah.
my dad not been in the military. And I also got a chance to see a lot of different places, meet a lot of different people. I got friends all over the world, and that's had a big influence on me as well. I think, Judge, it's fair to say, and I want you to talk a little bit more about this, because you were talking about thinking outside the box, and being creative as a lawyer. And I think it's fair to say, I don't think this will be too controversial to say, that lawyers have a reputation sometimes, and judges, of being a little reluctant to change, like a little reluctant. We like doing things in a certain way, and we're a little bit hesitant to try new things. And so obviously, you know, we don't have any choice right now, I don't think.
Right.
And so you've always had a reputation as being one of the judges that really kind of looks around the corner and tries to make things better and more efficient. So let's just jump right into it right now. Tell the ladies and gentlemen that are listening to this podcast right now that live in Harris County, what the judges, what you and some of the other judges, what you have done to kind of make sure the wheels of justice keep moving forward, and what you've got planned for the future. And just let us know kind of how the justice system is going. And Judge, I think it would also be fair to say that some of the things you're going to talk about are happening in other jurisdictions as well.
Right.
So this is not just for Harris County. This can, you know, if you don't live in Harris County, and a lot of our listeners don't, you're probably going to have some judges and lawyers in your community that are doing the same or similar things. So Judge, what are we doing to keep things rolling?
Well, let me give a little plug to the judicial branch, right? I mean, we're the least vocal. However, we're where people hate democracy. I mean, we're on the front lines of government. As I tell my panels of jurors that come in, I go, very few of you will ever be elected to the legislature, and even fewer will be an executive. But every single one of you gets to participate as a member of the judicial branch today.
Yeah.
And so we're on the front lines of this, and I think it's incumbent upon us to protect the people. And when it comes to a public health pandemic and a public health emergency, the first issue was, you know, what do we do with summoning people to come down to serve as juries? I mean, our entire form of government is built on people coming in and making it work, but we also have to protect those people. So that was, I think, the first act we did was to cancel jury service. And as you know, in Harris County, we've canceled jury service through the end of May.
Yeah.
We're trying to find ways to have jurors on standby, because there are some cases that warrant a jury trial. So if you, let's say, Brian, you get sick and you refuse to quarantine, and we say, no, you know, the government says, Brian, we're going to have to quarantine you. That's a fact question, whether or not you need to be quarantined. And
Yeah.
so that's Chapter 81.
Yeah.
And you have a right to a jury trial.
Yeah.
So that's the type of case that it's incumbent, and we have to get you a jury, because we need to get you quarantined if you're a risk to the public. And so we're trying to figure out ways to do that. I think most courts, other than the criminal courts, have done away with personal appearances. And in the criminal courts, they've done it so that very few personal appearances have to be done. And they're trying to socially distance there as well. Going forward, I mean, we're already looking past May. The federal courts in the Southern District have already said there'll be no jury trials through July 6th,
Okay.
at least. Going forward, we're discussing if we were to ever, the next time we bring in members of the public to serve on jury duty, where do we bring them in?
That was
Right,
going to be one of the questions I was going to ask you up front. I mean, I went to jury service. It couldn't have been more than about 5 or 6 months ago. And of course, in Harris County, you're in the tunnels, and there's hundreds and hundreds of people there, and you're all packed in close together. So I think a lot of us are wondering, if you ultimately get called for jury service this year, where do you go?
And that's what we're trying to figure out. I mean, it's not only where do you go, right? It's what location will you meet? I mean, in Travis County, you know, they're a much smaller county than Harris.
Yeah.
But they have an iJury system in which you email or you check in online, I think a week or two before your jury service, and you submit your email address, and they email you where to go. So you show up at the courtroom or on the floor that you're supposed to be at. The concern that we have in Harris County currently is under the public health emergency, we're not allowed to have more than 2 people per elevator.
Which is another thing that Harris County has had a little bit of an issue with since the hurricane is I mean,
facilities.
The facilities that they were damaged by the hurricane, and the elevators and some of the other facilities have not been repaired. So,
And so, I mean, and so, you know, Brian, and I'm going to try to unpack that because that creates a lot of issues for me as a judge, and I think, and for the public as well. We have suffered from Harvey. It was 3.5 years until our commissioner's court decided that we needed to fix the jury assembly room.
Yeah.
Right. And so that work started, I believe, in October of last year, and it's been interrupted a little bit by the pandemic. Not much. They're still on schedule from what I understand. The one bright spot of the pandemic is by the time we get back into the courthouse, I think that everyone will be in their own building. The criminal judges will be in the criminal building, and the civil judges will have their civil building back. But the real issue that Harvey plus pandemic has created is a backlog in cases.
Yeah.
Right. And so not only does this affect people who are serving as citizens, because people who serve as citizens, they'll come into the 127th and they'll go, I don't believe that I'm sitting here on a 2015 case.
Yeah.
Right. And and I say the same thing. I go, I don't believe that you're sitting here on a 2015 case. But, you know, I've been made a part-time judge, had my courtroom 2 weeks a month for 3 years. And now with the pandemic, you know, I don't know when we're going to try 2019 cases, 2020 cases, 2021 cases.
Yeah.
Right. So we've created a backlog, and, you know, and as we heard.
And for not to interrupt you, Judge, but for people who don't understand how the district courts work, one of the things that I think most of the judges try to do is they try to give some priority to the older cases. Right. And so now you can't always do that, but just so people understand what you're talking about, the backlog is in the older cases, the cases from 2015, 2016, 2017. And a lot of that has absolutely nothing to do with the way the lawyers or the judges handle it. It's just Hurricane Harvey in Houston particularly really backed us up quite a bit. So
no, and so, I mean, that's a huge issue, right? I mean, the public's confidence in the efficiency of the judiciary is massive, but we're not the ones who decide our budgets. We're not the ones who decide, you know, where our facilities are going to be. And so we're hampered by that. And now we've got this added layer of making sure that the folks that we bring in are safe.
Yeah.
From a public health perspective.
Yeah.
And so, you know, going forward, I was on a call yesterday, and one of the topics was even if you were to get a jury, even if you could bring in members of the public to sit for what we call jury selection, or what the lawyers in Texas call voir dire, which is actually a French term, but in Texas we don't like the French very much. But even if we were to bring in a panel of people, and most jury selection in Texas is 36 to 48 people on a normal case. That's how many jurors we bring in, potential jurors. There's only 4 places in Harris County that we've located that we could do jury selection.
Yeah.
And so, and that issue is we've got 24 civil district courts. We've got 60 district courts in Harris County. So if you've got 4 available spots for voir dire, that means if you have to break that up, that means each court gets a case every 15 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So we're really hampering the process in that way. And so, and you've got to understand, Brian, and I know you do, but the public also needs to understand that criminal cases get constitutional priority.
For sure. And as they should, but you know, that doesn't alleviate the concerns that somebody with a civil case may have.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden now they've got to wait another year or two to get their day in court. Well, you know, one thing I heard somebody mention a couple days ago, and I don't know if any of the judges or lawyers have thought about this, but has there been any discussion or thought about maybe you brought up the example of somebody that needs to be quarantined, like basically a COVID-19 court, or like a separate court to handle issues related to the pandemic?
So there have been 31 judges, I think, appointed statewide that are solely dealing with that issue.
Really?
They have sole discretion to deal with those quarantine issues, and they actually have statewide jurisdiction.
Okay.
So if the judge here out of Harris County is Judge Hawkins out of the 11th District Court,
Sure.
so she can exercise her authority on COVID-19 individuals anywhere in the state of Texas.
Well, that's really interesting. How long has that been in effect? Because I was not aware of that. I think a lot of lawyers and citizens in general are going to be real interested to hear that.
I think that started mid-March, end of March. I will say of the leadership in Texas and even nationally, the Texas Supreme Court's been pretty proactive. I mean, I will say that, and this is to brag on Harris County, but what happens in Harris County happens in Texas.
Yeah, right.
So we tend to lead the way, not only because we represent 6 million people, but I think we're a younger judiciary. We're a more progressive judiciary, and we're more mindful of our communities. And so, and like, what was it, last year, 2 years ago, I think I was the first court in the nation that did parental leave.
Yeah.
And then starting last year, almost, I think half the Harris County judiciary adopted it. And now Texas is going to adopt it.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what happens here really leads the way, not only, and, I was on a call with Jason Aitken, who you probably know, Brian,
Jason,
the other day.
Yeah.
And he said, I mean, he was in Missouri on a case, and the Missouri judges were well aware of what was happening in Harris County and trying to follow the lead.
Wow. Nice.
Of what the Houston courts were doing. We're the second largest filing jurisdiction in the country.
Well, and one of the things I was going to say, in addition to being a little bit younger judiciary, a little bit more progressive in terms of the court system, is also, I think it's fair to say that Harris County historically has had a very sophisticated judiciary. In other words, and you could probably give us some examples. One day you may be trying to car wreck over somebody with a bruised elbow, and the next day you're trying a multi-billion-dollar antitrust case. Like, we have the ability in Harris County and the sophistication in our judiciary to handle just about any kind of case, civil or otherwise, that comes up. And so, I have seen, and I'll reiterate what Jason told you, that some of the other courts in Texas that I practice in front of are asking what we're doing in Harris County. Like, they're specifically asking what we're doing in Harris County. And so, for instance, one of the things that Harris County has done, or most of the judges in Harris County has said, because in a civil lawsuit, there's certain things that have to be done before you go to trial. A lot of people think that watch TV, you just show up to court and then you argue your case, but there's depositions and hearings and things of that nature. And so one of the things the judges in Harris County have done is they have said, if you want to take a deposition, which is just questioning witnesses under oath, where we're normally all together, you can do that by Zoom, and it's not an excuse for a lawyer not to show up because he's on Zoom instead of in person. And that's really important, because you got to keep the process moving forward.
You got to keep it moving. I mean, and we went, when I say we, I use the royal we, because my team is way better than I am, but we've gone as far, the 127, to anytime, and and I'll explain this a little bit more. When someone seeks to find information, that's called discovery. And a lot of times, in order to stop that, the other side will file what they call a motion to quash, which means we don't want this discovery to go forward. At the beginning of April, we instituted a rule that any motion to quash is automatically set for hearing within 96 hours.
Yeah.
We did that because we want people working, because what we don't want happening is, when we're ready to try cases, people who say, well, we still have all this outstanding discovery because we couldn't get a hearing, or we couldn't get this done, we couldn't get that done. And we want to make sure everyone is primed to go to trial, because we all know, both plaintiffs' lawyers and defense lawyers know, the one thing that gets cases to settle are real trial dates.
Yeah.
And 98.9% of all cases settle.
Yeah. Yeah. There's absolutely no question about that at all. The vast majority of mine and everybody that does what I do, as long as they're evaluating cases appropriately, the vast majority of the cases settle, but they only settle typically when there's an impending trial date. So that's really, really important. So Judge, let me ask you, what do you foresee in terms of changes long term? Like, in other words, do you foresee any sort of change in the pattern of showing up to hearings in person, for instance? Like, it used to be before I was practicing, hundreds of lawyers would show up on Monday and they'd be assigned to, and they'd all be in the courthouse and they'd just get called to trial and called to hearings and stuff. And then, during our generation, your generation and mine, it's Friday morning or Monday morning, everybody shows up for hearings. Do you foresee that changing? And of course, it's going to change in the short term. But what do you think beyond the short term that kind of thing looks like?
I think this is great for the practice. I think it makes the judges, the judiciary, much more available. I think you're going to go back when it's safe to having in-person hearings. But what I also believe is going to happen, at least it's going to happen for me, is I'm going to set hearings every day.
Yeah.
And I'm going to set them during lunch or before I know the jury's going to be there. And so if you have an issue, it can be dealt with. The other thing is everyone has email. So if I need to get a hold of you and we need to have a hearing, I don't need to call you. I can send you a Zoom invite.
Yeah.
And I know you've received it because it didn't bounce back.
Yeah.
And I can set it. I can give you 2 hours notice that we're having a Zoom hearing on this issue. And that way, you're available. And I think what we're going to see more and more of, because a lot of times in the more complex, mostly, what I like to say, catastrophic injury cases, you have site inspections. And then you have issues that come up at a site inspection, but you can't really explain that to a court. But if you set up a Zoom hearing and the parties are at the site, it's a lot easier for the court to understand what's going on.
Yeah.
When the parties are actually where the occurrence took place.
Sure.
So I think it's going to help litigation. I think it's going to help courts be a lot more flexible. And I think parties, and the thing is, we always say as judges, be careful of what you ask for, right?
Yeah.
If you really want intervention, we're going to give you intervention.
Yeah.
You're going to get it much quicker now. It's not going to be, I don't think you're going to be in a situation where you're waiting 6 weeks to get a hearing date. You're in a situation where, you need a hearing date. Here's a hearing date in 3 days.
So I'm smiling a little bit right now because I read an article yesterday or the day before about all the new excuses that people have for Zoom meetings, right? So Judge, just be ready when you send a Zoom meeting to a lawyer for him to say, the microphone on my camera broke, and so I can't get on Zoom. But it was a whole list of new excuses. One thing I've noticed, and a lot of my colleagues have noticed, Judge, and I'm curious whether this is intentional or this is just kind of how it's worked out, but a lot of the emotions and the legal hearings and issues that we've had over the past 3 weeks, we can't do them obviously in person, and some of the time you don't even do them by video, but we've been doing them by submission, which for people who don't know what that means, sometimes you have legal arguments where the lawyers are actually doing it like they do on TV, where they're in front of the judge and they're making their arguments. Sometimes you just do it on written paper. We call that submission. And one of the things, Judge, I've noticed is you and your colleagues seem to be signing orders at a absolutely furious pace, like very, very quick and responsive. And I'm wondering whether that was intentional, whether y'all talked about it, or whether that's just kind of happened as a result of this pandemic.
I can speak to my experience, and my experience is I'm having fewer submission hearings.
Yeah.
And so on a normal week, and and part of this is just to give a greater scope and go to and sort of pat the Supreme Court on the back. Beginning in March, we've got a group of judges on the 10th floor here in Harris County who are all basically the same age, who have children the same age. And so we talked about, and the Judge Gomez, Judge Carter, and Judge Collier and I
Sure.
talked about this, and we decided that we weren't going to do foreclosures or defaults during the pandemic, because it's just a lot of times the default is when someone sues you, you get a piece of paper saying I've been sued, and you just ignore it.
Yeah.
So once you receive that 10 days later, they can come in and get a judgment against you. And so we talked about it and decided that, a lot of times what ends up happening is someone gets that piece of paper, they don't have the money to afford a lawyer, so they just show up on the date of submission or the date of the hearing. And that does away with the automatic judgment against them. And we figured if we're in the middle of a pandemic, we can't expect people to show up.
Yeah.
So a lot of our traffic, and what I'm getting at is a lot of our traffic on defaults, I've pushed all the way to June 8th. Right. And then and foreclosures have been pushed off to June 8th.
Yeah.
So those types of things that are a little bit more document intensive and take a little bit more time on our end to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed have gone away.
Yeah.
So we have fewer hearings on submission than we're used to. So you're getting them out. But I think there is a concerted effort in the judiciary not to create bottlenecks.
Yeah.
I mean, and so I think it's to the benefit, because I think, at the end of the day, it's one of the very few professions where the people that make the decisions are the same as you.
Yeah.
We're all in this together. I mean, we're all lawyers. We've all been there. We all understand what making a ruling, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, does to a case. It moves the case forward.
Yeah.
So we're doing our best to make sure that the lawyers are able to do what's best in the best interest of their client, and ultimately in the best interest of the people of Harris County and Texas.
And so speak to this issue a little bit, Judge, if you don't mind. So I think a lot of people have an image in their mind of the legal system of either being what they see on TV in terms of like criminal cases or big civil lawsuits and things of that nature. But the reality is you and your fellow judges handle a lot of what is basically kind of routine legal work. But without that legal work, the economic machinery just grinds to a halt. So can you tell us from your view why it's so important? Set aside the big criminal cases, set aside the big civil cases. Let's just talk about why on a day-to-day basis it is so important for the economy in Harris County and Texas to keep the wheels of justice moving as best we can.
Because we deal with real people.
Yeah.
And we deal with real dollars.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm running a caseload right now about 2,200 to 2,500 cases, 60% of which are probably valued under $100,000.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, in the scheme of things, and when you think about lawsuits and you're talking about $100,000, most people are like, oh my God, why would you? I mean, that's a small amount of money.
Yeah.
But $100,000 is a lot of money for me. I'm sure it's a lot of money for you, Brian.
Yeah, for sure.
And the issue is, but these cases involve real Harris County individuals.
Yeah.
Not only that, they're represented by attorneys who make their money by defending or prosecuting these cases. And secondly, in most of those cases, the 60% of those cases are usually involving some sort of insurance.
Yeah.
So it also helps set premiums for Harris County.
Right.
Right. I mean, we really, I tell jurors when they come in, we are the TMZ of Harris County. Right? When you come into jury service, we're the Twitter, we're the Facebook, we're where it's at. If you want the gossip, you get it at the courthouse. You find out who's died, who got married, who got divorced, who bought a piece of property.
I love that.
And so, I mean, we're making a difference incrementally every day for every person in Harris County.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what I think. Before I knew anything about it, before I became a lawyer, saw what judges actually do on a day-to-day basis, I didn't really appreciate how much non-criminal and like big civil case work that judges do. So for instance, like if you have a family law issue, it's not like you can just call timeout for the next 3 months if it's an emergency issue. I mean, you have to get some relief from the court on some of these issues, and you have to get it sooner rather than later. And so without that, like we've been talking about, the whole system just kind of grinds to a halt. So, Judge, tell us, and by the way, I'm cognizant of your time, and I appreciate your time, and this has been super informative so far. Tell us about. I think a lot of us in the legal community consider you to be something of a thought leader on the judiciary, and so tell us a little bit about. Maybe give our listeners, both the lawyers and just the general populace of Harris County, maybe some advice on mindset, some things they can be thinking about right now, whether that has to do anything at all to do with the judiciary, but just kind of tell us how you're looking at this time period right now. Like how are you seeing this, and what are you trying to do personally or professionally to get out the other end of this thing, either the same or better position as you went into it?
You know, we discussed a little bit about this before, Brian. I mean, I'm reading a lot. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm trying to read a book a week while we're under this, and I've been doing a lot of yoga. I've been biking a lot. I've been out playing ball with my 13-year-old.
Yeah.
But I think, and I've stressed this for quite some time, and I don't know. This was sort of this hit a switch for me at 38 about 5 years ago. I mean, I'd ask everyone to be mindful of everyone's humanity, right?
Yeah.
It is a tough time. I mean,
Yeah.
even if you're not affected, your health's not affected, your finances aren't affected. It is a stressful time.
Yeah.
And when you layer other issues on top of that, I mean, it's not an additive process. It's an exponential amount of stress.
Yeah.
And so I think people, at the supermarket or driving, people are easily annoyed. And I think, taking a step back and, like those old ads we used to see, take 10 seconds before you react.
Yeah.
Take some time. And I think we need to be a little bit more open to outside the box leadership. I think we need to not try to solve problems like we've solved them in the past, because this is unlike any problem we've seen in our lifetime and in generations. I think the last time we saw something like this was 1918 during the swine flu.
Yeah.
And I'm not the biggest fan of the president, but I will say when he talks about putting infrastructure spends in the stimulus, I think you've got to look beyond the pandemic, right? I mean, you've got to look at what do we need? How do we keep people employed? You've got to look at, let's not look at what step we take tomorrow, but let's look at the steps we need to take in 18, 24, 36 months.
Yeah.
Right? We need leadership with vision. And I think we're in a mindset, and part of this is media, part of this is sort of, we're solving problems in 280 characters or less.
Yeah.
But we sort of lose sight. We lose sight of the future because we're blinded by immediacy.
Yeah.
And I think some things, even though they look like they may hurt in the next week or two, that they don't make sense in the next week or two, but if we play them out for weeks, months, or years in the future, I think it helps us dig out of the hole that we're in, and through no fault of anybody's. I mean, this is nature, and I think we just have to be a little bit more forgiving, not only of our local and national leaders, but also of each other.
I can't tell you how happy I am that you said that. I can tell you a personal experience I had with that. So I was listening to some podcasts and reading some other information sources in January that really frightened me. And it wasn't that I knew anything about virology or epidemiology. It's just that I kind of knew who to listen to. And so I was listening to these scientists, and they really scared me a lot. And I started getting on social media in early March, basically trying to warn people about this. And I was extremely frustrated because it was like I couldn't get through to about half the people that follow me on social media. And looking back, frankly, I think I was being a little bit of a jerk about it. And, because, I understood it, but there's a lot of people that either didn't listen to the podcast or haven't read the same stuff. And it doesn't mean they're bad people. It doesn't mean have bad incentives or morals or anything like that. But you know, I think it's so easy to fall into the social media trap of just yelling at each other. And if somebody thinks differently from you about, for instance, what we should do right now about opening the economy, it's so easy to just tell them they're wrong and tell them they're stupid or tell them they don't know what they're talking about. And that, as you and I both know, that not only doesn't work, that's probably going to cause whoever you're talking to dig in even deeper. So I've tried really hard to be a little bit more compassionate.
And and to that point, I mean, I think, I've been doing this last week, and going into May, we're going to continue doing it. But being mindful of the people that are invisible to us all, right? The people who stock our groceries, the people that have to show up at work, and appreciating them, and just it is. We often live lives, and I mean, I don't know what the lives of the majority of your listeners or viewers are, but I mean, I live a very privileged life.
Yeah.
And everything's, I know it doesn't happen automatically, but things happen that I don't know how they happen.
Yeah.
But I know there are other people involved, and, to be thankful and taking a moment of gratitude, even if you don't do anything, but just to think of it. And so next time you see the person checking you out at the grocery store and they screw up, ringing up your orange at, 49 cents instead of 29 cents, having a little bit of a pause and just understand that they're human too. And they're in a place that not only they're not only dealing with this COVID situation, but they're being put in front of people on a minute by minute basis. Right. It's just, it's an interesting time.
It's very, very interesting time, and in some ways, I think if we look at this situation the right way, if we're mentally flexible, in some ways we have a tremendous opportunity here. This virus, this pandemic, I think has opened a lot of people's eyes about some of the things you're talking about, like the people that without them we do not have a functioning society. And they are so critical to our society, and yet, like you said, they're invisible to us most of the time. And that, if anything comes out of this, maybe kind of refocusing our attention on what's really important in our country, and focusing on maybe some different values and priorities. So, Judge, let me ask you this question. What do you see as kind of a thought leader? What do you think? Let's not talk anymore about the next couple months. Let's talk about the next 6 months, 8 months, 12 months. What do you see the future holding?
I think in terms, you want me to talk about the judiciary? You want me to talk about
whatever's on your mind? Whatever's on your mind.
I think you have a more mindful populace.
Yeah.
I think you have people that understand the risks of going out and doing things. And, and when Judge Hidalgo, who's our county judge here in Harris County, tells people they need to wear masks for 30 days and people lash out at her for whatever reason, I think when you see others taking it seriously, you understand that it's serious.
Yeah.
And even if you disagree, and you have every right to disagree, that you understand these issues are serious and they're going to affect a lot of people. I think you see a world that puts a lot more focus on family.
Yeah.
Because you've been stuck with your family now for, 60 to 70 days. I think you're going to see a higher focus on family. I think you're going to see a higher focus on cohesiveness within your own sort of community unit, whatever that is, if it's just your immediate family or if it's you and your friends.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see a lot more appreciation of people. I really think you are. And I think long term, I mean, if it were up to me, and this is all outside of my bailiwick, but I mean, if you can lose 30 million jobs in 4 weeks, tying health insurance to employment is the silliest thing in the world.
Do you know where that comes from? Do you know where we originally tied?
Labor unions.
Now, it was actually after World War II when the veterans were coming back, they were offering benefits because they couldn't pay them enough money and income. So point is, it was a complete historical accident that insurance is connected to employment. I couldn't agree with you more. Well, Judge, I know you've got to go. You're super busy. You've got thousands of cases you're still in charge of. Not only your cases, but now you've got to organize all of us lawyers and help with just keeping everything moving forward. I got to tell you, this has been getting an hour of your time has been extremely valuable to a lot of people, I think, in Harris County. I think a lot of people are going to really like hearing what you have to say. And I think this is going to hopefully give both lawyers and the citizens generally confidence that our judges and our legal system is on top of things as much as we can be. So, Judge, before I let you go, tell the listeners where they can find you online, whether you're on Twitter or Facebook or your website. Where can they find you if they're looking for you, Judge?
My website is Judge Sandill, SANDILL.com. I'm pretty active on Twitter at RKS127TH, RKS127. And then I've got a Facebook page of my own, personal Facebook page, and then a Judge R.K. Sandill Facebook page. I'm pretty active on all my social media. And, you know, I think mostly it's because it's fun, it's an outlet. And then secondly, I think it's, you know, it's at some point, I like to let people know that judges actually have a voice and think outside of what they do in the courtroom.
Yeah. Well, Judge, it's like I said, it's been a huge privilege and a huge pleasure. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you setting aside an hour of your extremely valuable time. And I hope we can do this again sometime soon. And if you need anything from the lawyers side of things, just let us know, and we'll do whatever we can to help you with what you're doing and your colleagues with what they're doing.
Well, Brian, thank you for thinking of me. Be safe and take care.
You've been listening to Lessons from Leaders with Brian Beckcom. If you've enjoyed this week's interview, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and keep up with the latest episodes. You can also connect with Brian through his firm at vbattorneys.com.